I hope this works. I want to welcome everybody once, coming back to another series with Father Tom. That's always a delight. And I'm excited about the topic. I know many of you are as well, although we all said, Tom, it doesn't matter what you're talking about. It's interesting and you get us on board. So that's a good thing. But this is a really interesting topic, especially following on the heels of International Women's Day. We are going to be talking about women's voices throughout the centuries. So thank you, Tom, for saying yes to this. And please join me in welcoming Father Tom.
Thank you, Darcy. It's good to see you again. Hello, everyone.
Oh, hello.
We'll begin with the prayer for the Synod. We stand before you, Holy Spirit, as we gather together in your name. With you alone to shepherd us, make yourself at home in our hearts. Teach us the way we must go and how we are to pursue it. We are always in need of forgiveness and healing. Do not let us promote disorder. Do not let ignorance lead us down the wrong path, nor partiality influence our actions. Let us find in you our unity, so that we may journey together to life eternal, and not stray from the way of what is right, true, good, and beautiful. All this we ask of you who are at work in every place and time, and in every one, in communion with the Father and the Son, forever and ever. Amen.
Amen.
Well, this is an ongoing series on the mosaic of Catholic or Christian thought through the centuries. And in particular, what we're focusing on in this particular series is the rise of women's voice throughout the centuries of the Church. So over the next several sessions, if you look at page 14 of the notes that we sent you, you'll see a brief outline of the material that's upcoming. Today, the voice of New Testament women as foundational. Next week, the 16th, revisiting the prophecy of Mary, the mother of Jesus. The 23rd, medieval women realized the divine voice within their heart. And then on March the 30th, contemporary Catholic women or contemporary Christian women and the voice that's emerging within them. Here at the Interfaith Peace Project, one of our defining moments was the International Day, or the International Women's Day in 2015, is when the Interfaith Peace Project made a concerted effort to encourage that issues regarding women's rights and women's dignity are at the essence of interfaith work. If you look across the world, you can see that the way a particular religion deals with women has an awful lot to do with human dignity in general. And you see this in the Ukraine. You see, yesterday I was scandalized beyond my wildest dream as the Russian Orthodox Patriarch of Moscow, who claims to be a Christian, supported Putin and said that Putin is upholding Christian values against gay people in particular.
Elizabeth Williamson, welcome to Fresh Air.
And you also see this in relationship to Jews, minority groups, and the rights of women. And even in this country, there are people who call themselves conservative Christians who are sympathetic to Putin in the Ukraine because of some idea that this upholds traditional Christian values. And today, Mr. Putin, one of the most evil people who ever lived, bombed the children's hospital and a maternity hospital and killed everybody in it. Now, if that's Christianity, then I will be available at 4 o'clock this afternoon for some intense therapy from anybody who would like to tell me how you can possibly justify a political philosophy that enables this kind of insanity. When we talk about women's voice and women's rights, we're not talking about some silly, crazy movement that was invented in the imagination of radical right-wing people in order to make the area trivial. The fact is, to the degree you suppress women's voice, to that degree you suppress the rights and the dignity of men. What is at issue here is not simply women versus men. What is at issue here is human dignity throughout the world. So to this day, the Interfaith Peace Project finds itself in various forms of trouble because anytime you talk about the dignity of women, somehow or another we're supposed to hold traditional values and traditional ways of thinking. Since I refuse to go down pathways of antagonism and resentment, I would like to go back through the centuries and pay attention to women's voice as it unfolds, especially in the New Testament, so that we can pay attention that the prejudices that we have are born out of modern influences, not ancient realities. For too long, we have heard people say, well, Jesus was nice to women in the Bible. Look at the way he treated the prostitute. Almost as if it's impossible to talk about women in the New Testament without talking about prostitution. And that somehow or another, Jesus was nice to the prostitute because we all know she was a sinner. Now, anybody can figure out that prostitution is not a sin that women commit. It's a crime that's committed against women. So to think that all Jesus did was be nice to women, as long as women maintained their so-called traditional places, is not only a false reading of the New Testament, but it warps the essence of the New Testament teaching. Now, I'm sort of hot and heavy with this at the moment because we're killing people. It is time for us to realize that the teaching that we get in our heads, these ideas that we get in our heads are detrimental to the lives of very, very real people. How many more people or how many more women have to be maimed and destroyed before we understand what it is that we're doing? So for the work that I do, International Women's Day is not simply March the 8th. It's every day of the week. We have integrated the philosophy of March the 8th, the International Day of Women, into everything that we do. So thank you very much for allowing me to be part of your life for these next couple of weeks as we pursue the teaching, the authentic teachings of the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament itself. If you have the notes in front of you, I would like to reference page 2. Now, way back in 1995, when the work that I was doing took on more significance and this whole issue of women's voice was important. If I may, let me jump to an aside here. One of the reasons why this is so crucial to me, I grew up in a family of 7 women. There were 7 women in the core family. All 7 of those women were abused. all 7 of those women suffered either physical abuse, verbal abuse, sexual assault, somewhere in their life, if not in the family system. And from the time I was a little boy, it struck me that there's something wrong here. Yet when I went to church, when I listened to the society, when I looked at the way things were in the neighborhood, this was almost considered to be normal. In the early days of my priesthood, I would hear confessions like this. A woman would come to confession and say, "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. It's 2 weeks since my last confession, and I got angry twice and impatient 4 times." So one day I decided I would say, "Excuse me, but is it okay with you if I asked you a question?" Because remember, the sacrament is not meant to be a place of interrogation. It's not a courtroom. The priest in the confessional should ask permission to ask a question and not assume some kind of right over the penitent. The woman said, "Oh, yes, Father, that would be fine. What do you mean by impatience?" And she said, "Oh, my husband only beats me when I deserve it." And of course, this is what happens when assault is internalized. So we have to be careful. 1 out of 4 women suffer assault. So I'm not simply looking at Bible verses because I have nothing else to do. I'm looking at Bible verses so that not another woman on the face of this earth has to suffer assault. A few days ago, there was somebody in the House of Representatives in the United States who said to his daughters, who said to the public press about his daughters, that he said to his daughters, if they were being raped and couldn't do anything about it, to settle back and enjoy it. And these are people running around that they're the religious people, that they're the biblical people, that they're following after the tradition. As a man, I'm insulted. As a priest, I'm horrified. As a religious person, I'm shamed. I don't want to be associated with those people. I don't want to hate them, but they do need to be liberated. The day has got to come to an end where we stop using Bible verses to hurt people. There is no Bible verse out there that's more important than another human being. So in 1995, on June 29th, to be precise, John Paul II wrote a letter of apology to women. And that letter of apology to women has become one of the most important documents within my life. John Paul recognized that in the history of humankind and in the history of the church, that the voice and the dignity of women has often been compromised and their contributions to the world forgotten or ignored. The Pope formally apologized to women for any participation the church had in the assault, the marginalization, and the neglect of women through the centuries, and called on the church in the contemporary sense to do all in its power to redress that wrong. So before people start labeling me the liberal, the left wing, and start with the name calling, and going down the way to them deviating from the magisterium. It is the magisterium that calls us to do this work. I can assure you, John Paul II did not call me on the phone to get my opinion about what letters he should write to the church. But it is my responsibility as a practitioner in the church to pay attention to papal magisterium. And not half of it, and not some of it, and not the parts I like, and edit out the parts I don't like. I'm not an editorial board in a television station or an ideologue on a radio. As a practitioner, as a Christian, as a Catholic Christian, inside the Catholic Church, what does the church teach? What does the church hold up? And what does the church require us to do? And if we take the letter of John Paul seriously, and the subsequent documentation that has come out, we have to realize this is not just documentation, and we cannot simply reduce it to words on paper. It has to become a reforming movement in our mind, heart, and soul. That letter was a turning point in my life, a consoling point in my life, and a rallying call. That in everything I would do from that day forward, I would attempt to bring justice to minority groups, understanding the people on the edge and rejected, and especially to recognize the dignity of women. We are not giving women dignity. We are not giving women rights. We are recognizing the rights and dignity that they have. Because to the degree that you oppress women, to that degree, men are oppressed. So what's at issue here is whether or not humankind should be liberated. To take this in stages of development, today I would like to take you to the Gospel of St. Mark. Because we need to go back to one of the fundamental sources. Now, this is not as far back as I go. And the interfaith work that I do, and the interfaith spirituality, I have run programs that are called The Rise of the Goddess. That is examining the feminine understanding of the divine going back in human history. And also the famous program called The Apology to Eve, which rereads the Adam and Eve story in the Jewish Bible, which is a very, very critical story to reconsider, because so much damage had been done in the way that particular text is read. Since we cannot do everything, we have to find a starting point. Our starting point would be the New Testament in general, and the Gospel of Mark in particular. There are three texts that I would like to share with you by way of introduction. Let's do this as calmly as we possibly can, and I'll stop from time to time to see if you have any questions or concerns or anything you would like to share. If you're following with me in the notes, we're on page 3, or if you're in the Bible, it would be Mark's Gospel, chapter 1, verses 29 to 31 in particular. They left the synagogue. They entered into the house of Simon Peter, Simon and Andrew's house, with James and John. Simon's mother-in-law was sick in bed with a fever, and they told Jesus about her. Notice that the woman has no name. notice that the woman is known by virtue of the fact of her relationship to a man. And in this case, she is the mother-in-law of Simon Peter. It frequently happens that in reference in women, they have no name. I'll never forget the day my mother was introduced as Mrs. Thomas J. Bonacci, my father's wife. I said to I was about 10. I looked at her, I said, Mom, you don't have a name anymore? After all, your name, my mother's full name was Annunciella Marie, because part of her family was from France. She was also known as Nancy, a very lovely way to refer to Annunciella, the Annunciation. How does Annunciella Marie become Thomas J? My mother disappears. She has a masculine name. I even hear sometimes a woman being introduced. Hello, Father. This is my car. This is my dog. And this is my wife. Oh, she's a possession. Does she come out twice a week? Simon's mother-in-law. Not Elizabeth, not Nancy, not Frederica. Simon's mother-in-law. She has no name. She never has a name. Tradition will have to give her a name. I don't even know what name tradition gives her. But in the gospel, she has no name. And notice by now, Jesus has already called disciples. So you have Andrew, you have Simon, you have James, and you have John. They have names. And so far, they haven't done anything except followed after Jesus, sort of, maybe. We already know from the whole gospel, these will be the first people to betray him, the first people to deny him. So the people who have names, the people who have status, the people who have power, the people who have authority, they're well named. But the mother-in-law, she's known by, well, she's somehow related to Simon, the mother-in-law. As soon as Jesus heard about her, at once he went to her. He took her by the hand. If you read this in Greek, he grasped her by the hand. It's as if she was about to fall over a cliff. And before she fell over the cliff, he ran to her and grabbed her by the hand and pulled her back. He lifted her up, not in the air as if levitating out of a bed, but pulled back as if fallen over a cliff. For oftentimes, the nameless one, the marginalized one, the rejected one, the one who has fallen over the cliff or been pushed over the cliff, needs to be grasped and pulled back to life. The fever left her. Actually, Mark says the fever let go of her. And she began to serve them. Oh, she's going to serve them. She's going to become the typical woman. Get into that kitchen, make some tea, bake some biscuits, get out the butter and the jam and feed them in. And don't forget to get some cheese and maybe some of that nice meatloaf you made last week before you got sick and useless. We gloss right over the word and we say, Jesus, the miracle worker. But we have to be careful. The text does not end with the emphasis on Jesus, the miracle worker, but it ends with the woman in service to them. And that word, she served him, is the word from which you derive the modern word deacon, one who serves. And not one who serves at an altar, but one who serves the poor, the broken, the marginalized, the rejected. In other words, Andrew, Simon, James, and John might have been called to follow Jesus, but the first person in the Gospel of Mark to actually do something that exemplifies what it is to be following Jesus in their deeds is the nameless woman. The nameless woman is the first disciple of Jesus who has no name, who does what Jesus will do. To this day, Jesus is remembered by what happens at the table. Since the altar of the church is the table of the Lord, and you can't say table in the Christian community without remembering Jesus, who breaks the bread, shares the cup, opens the word, and washes the feet. That word serve then cannot simply be reduced to what a waiter would do, a waitress would do in a diner, even though that's noble. It must be inclusive of what Jesus will do and does do in the community of the disciples. Rarely is this text treated as the woman being called to discipleship. But to the degree she is serving, and to the degree that that word served is actually a word that's used to describe Jesus himself, she becomes the first disciple who makes a difference in the life of other people. She serves the apostles who have yet to serve anybody. And in her actions, she reveals what Jesus will do. The mere fact that Mark uses the term like he raised her up, he pulled her back, points to his own resurrection. So this nameless woman, Simon's mother-in-law, her deeds still pulses through the church today, if not the world. We see it in Ukraine. We see the women of Ukraine standing up to save their children, standing up to save their country. Be careful the next time you think you're a nameless person who's worthless, useless. Sometimes it's in the simple deeds of our love, the simple deeds of our caring, that the risen one is felt. John Paul points out in his letter that the names of the great women who have blessed humankind has often been forgotten, if not erased from history. It is our obligation and our duty to retrieve who they are. This woman is not simply the object of Jesus's healing. She becomes his disciple. No sooner is she touched by him, she becomes his touch in the world. Okay, let's stop for a moment, take a deep breath. Let the Spirit be with you. Any questions, any concerns? Don't forget to take yourself off mute. Anything you would like to share?
I'd just like to say that I think you're absolutely right about how women have been treated, not only in their private life, but in public life. I mean, yeah, I see the pictures of the women in Ukraine. They are the ones that are fighting to preserve life, their life and the life of their children. I think in today's world, we have to realize that I think in the church itself, in our church, we're really seeing that the role of women should be expanded. And I think Pope Francis has done a good job with trying to get that message across. From what I've read of Pope Francis, he's very much in favor of doing that.
Thank you so much. That's important insight. Colleen?
Thank you for mentioning the real status of what was referred to as prostitution. I remember it was at St. Peter and Paul many years ago when Deacon Dave said that the woman taken in adultery was a woman trafficked. She was a victim of abuse. She just to stay alive, she was forced into what they considered something evil and horrible, but it was really the men who did it. And I remember everybody in the church gasping. And sure enough, it was in America Magazine that month. And those are those, like you said, Tom, real eye openers that how could we have looked at it any other way? Women had no rights unless they were owned or controlled by a man. They were forced to do anything that they did, and yet they still were caring and loving and nurturing to all these goofballs who didn't know what they were doing. Thank you. Thank you for giving women status.
And that's the deep theological term, the goofballs. I love that. I love that. I will put that in my notebook. Thank you for that. Thanks for sharing that, Helen.
Yeah, Diane, you brought up a good point about women and the changing status in our faith, and we are hearing that in our synod listening sessions. Dan is being one of the recorders, and we're hearing that in our listening sessions.
Yes, that'll be fascinating to see what's emerging. Because remember, women's voice is not going to come into the church because of the modern church. It's in its core. The nameless woman who served Jesus at table, her action is reverberating through the centuries. Hopefully we will catch up with our heart. Hopefully we will catch up with our soul. Hopefully we will catch up with our roots and bless the world.
Tom, if I may, I was struck, thank you. I was struck today by, I've heard you talk about this before, the nameless women. And I'm wondering if that isn't part of who we really are. We don't need to put ourselves forth as I'm important here. Rather, as Simon's mother-in-law, I'm the servant here. This is I take care of the people who are in need, rather than, hey, look at me, look at what I'm doing. I'm so important here. Not to say that we shouldn't be named, but naming, I don't think for most women is as important as who they are and what they do.
But see, that's the generosity. It's one thing to humble yourself. It's another thing to be humiliated by the institutions. And that's why next week we'll pay quite a bit of time on Mary, the Mother of Jesus. because this is the woman who, according to Luke, experienced humiliation of the systemic humiliation from the institution, but held on to her willingness to be a person of humility. I think what you have in the Gospel of Mark here is a woman who literally has been pushed over the cliff, pushed out of the side. That's why if the translation simply says he touched her, or he put his hands upon her, it's not an accurate translation, because the Greek implies pulled her back from danger, from being over the cliff. Suzanne, what you share is very, very important, because it speaks to the humility that disciples must have, and also to the courage that disciples must have. Because oftentimes, if we don't have a great name associated to our deed, we discount the deed. Think of how many times in your own life somebody may have saved your life through something gentle, and they didn't even know it. They didn't know how profoundly they touched you, only you did. Let me take you now ever so gently to chapter 5 of the Gospel of Mark. And this is on page 4 of your notes, or if you're in the Bible, chapter 5, around verses 24 to 34. In these verses, if you look at the total text, there are 2 episodes compressed into one. Jesus crossed the lake and come back, and he's met by a synagogue official whose little daughter is very sick. Jesus begins to walk with him to the synagogue official's house. Interestingly enough, the synagogue official, who's a man, has a name. His name is Jairus. The daughter doesn't have a name. The mother doesn't have a name, but the father has a name. Jesus walks with the father to the house of the synagogue in order to meet the little girl who's sick in bed. As he's walking with the father to the house where the little girl is, there's an interruption that occurs. And we pick that up in verse 24 of chapter 5. A large multitude was pressing upon Jesus. So as he's going from the edge of the lake to the synagogue house where the little girl is, there's a multitude pressing upon him. The word followed and pressed are very hostile. It's not a group of people walking with him, but pushing and shoving, as Mark will soon say. It's a group that's overwhelming with energy, perhaps high excitement, but somewhat violent or potentially abusive. So Jesus is walking with the synagogue official, Jairus, to the little girl's house where she's dying. Now, that's a very endearing moment. Here we see Lord Jesus for the father, who's obviously brokenhearted that he might lose his daughter. The two of them are walking together. Did you ever walk with somebody in a moment of grief? Walk with somebody in a moment of loss? Walk with somebody in a moment of treachery? That's what you have here. And yet there's a multitude pressing upon Jesus. So there is a sense of urgency here. There's a sense of emergency. There's a sense of intimacy. Now, Mark then in verse 25 says, now there was a woman there. And I love this because in the gospel, there's always a woman there, especially at the foot of the cross. After the disciples run away, the other disciples show up. Now there was a woman there. Now there was a woman there who suffered from severe hemorrhages for 12 years. which is the biblical way of saying she had a perfect illness. She had endured much under many physicians. She spent all the money she had. But instead of getting better, she grew worse. She heard about Jesus. She came up behind him in the multitude. Now notice the woman is desperate. She spent all her money on health care. She's been to many physicians. We know that today there is a critique in modern healthcare for women, that women receive very poor healthcare in general, often dismissed with their symptoms or treated superficially. Oh. Sometimes if you have a woman physician, people have second thoughts. I remember a long time ago, I had surgery and the surgeon was a woman. And the superior of the monastery and my family came to me and said, "Are you going to allow a woman to touch you?" I said, "Well, I was actually going to allow a surgeon to do the operation. I really don't care if the surgeon is a kangaroo. I think it has to be somebody who knows what they're doing. Do you want me to get the janitor who happens to be a man to do the surgery because he's a man? Well, I don't know. Is she really a surgeon? Yes, I think so. She's been working in the hospital long before I showed up. I don't know if this is what, you sure you don't want to get a male surgeon? Even when the woman's providing the health care, there's a problem. Anyway, the woman's destitute. She spent all her money. She's sicker. She comes to Jesus behind him. She says to herself, "If I but just touch the tassel of his cloak, I shall get well." So she came up behind him, and a multitude is pushing and shoving. She touched him. Not even him, the tassel of his cloak. She had the feeling deep inside that she was relieved of her illness. Jesus felt the power go out from him. He turned around in the multitude and he said, "Who touched me?" Now his disciples, Peter, James, John, and Andrew, go out of their minds. "What do you mean, who touched you? You're being shoved and pushed by all these people, and you want to know who touched you." See, how can you feel a gentle touch when you're being shoved? And that's the essence of the work we do. The gentle touch when the world is shoving and pushing. I don't know about you, but I feel battered. I just spent 2.5 years trying to tiptoe through the virus. Can't get sick, can't get sick. After all, I have condition to the, what do they call that? I have difficulty. I can't get the virus, pre-existing conditions. So I get through. I don't have a virus. Now I'm on the verge of a world war. I don't know about you. I need a week off. I'm willing to do with the trauma of the world, but can I have a couple days off? Maybe one. We didn't have 15 seconds. It's like no sooner did the virus calm down, we have Putin in our face. It's kind of hard to have any hope. Jesus is being pushed and shoved by a hostile multitude, yet he feels the touch. Who touched me? His disciples want to know, how can you feel a touch when you're being pushed? He paid no attention to them. Love it. He went in hot pursuit. The woman came up, knelt down before him and confessed the whole thing. "I touched you. And he said, my daughter. Notice the empathy of Jesus. He was on his way to the house of a little girl who's dying. She was the daughter of the beloved Father. Jesus is so filled with empathy that he says to the woman, my daughter, your faith has saved you. Not I have saved you, your faith, your courage. All over the world, there are women who have the courage to touch when other people run away. There's some who are assaulting us with their guns and their rifles, with their bombs and their missiles, killing our children. And yet there are women who will search through the rubble to find a child they might save. The disciple of Jesus, be they man or woman, be they adult or child, seeks to touch, the gentle touch, and the mayhem and the chaos of life. Finally, messengers come from the synagogue house. The little girl is dead, trouble the teacher no more. Jesus says to the father, be of great faith. She's not dead, she merely sleeps. Let's go to her. He took his disciples and the father and the mother and went into the room where the child was after being mocked by the multitudes. He took her by the hand. Little one, arise. She got up and walked around. She danced around. She was 12 years old. Jesus said, tell no one, give her something to eat. Jesus doesn't even make a scene out of his own power to raise somebody. Tell no one, give her something to eat. Perhaps the mother-in-law will now show up serving a table. Give her something to eat. Notice the love and the respect that is here. My daughter, your faith has saved you. Your courage, your willingness to believe beyond the limits the world imposes, your willingness to touch. And he takes the little girl by the hand. I could hear Jesus saying to her, can I have this dance? Remember, my dear friends, what we're saying about Jesus and his relationship to women is not exclusive to women. It's Jesus and his relationship to us, be we man or woman, or however we self-define. It's not put down to raise somebody else up. It's inclusion. Notice how he doesn't believe for a moment that he's bringing something to their life that they don't have. Rather, he's bringing something forth from their heart they may have forgotten they had. Any thoughts, any feelings, anything you'd like to share? Just don't forget to take yourself off mute. Sharon.
When you talked about having no name, that bothered me because in the scriptures it says, I have called you by name, you are mine. And I know that in Genesis, everything was given a name to show that there was a relationship. And so how does that connect with these stories where these women don't have names? I mean, they have a relation. Or did they, are they not? I just don't see the connection about, for me to be, to have a name is to be known intimately by God.
Well, that's the point. The point is, we don't know what her name is before God, But before the institution, before the society, before the convention, she has no name. Her name's been eradicated. That's the point. He goes to the nameless. Now,
Oh,
what's interesting is in the Eastern Church, the Eastern Church from ancient times always gave names to these people. I would have to look it up. All the people who do not have names in the scripture have names in the liturgy. And they also have feast days. So that's the point. Many times in life, what God has given a precious name to, the name has been forgotten. The name has been eradicated. The person has been replaced by a category. For example, slaves. Slaves were named after their masters, not as persons, but as objects. Sometimes when people ask you, if you ever dealt with abused children, oftentimes if you ask the child their name, they tell you the name they were cursed with, as opposed to their name. So part of healing, part of restoration, part of radical resurrection is what is your name. Does that help a little bit?
yes, yes.
Thank you. What is your name? See, you can get so used to being called names that you think the name you're called is who you are.
Yeah.
Did I ever tell you that? Let me tell you a little story. Way back 40 years ago, we were doing retreats for people who had psychological difficulties. I was a little late and I walked in the room and two women, there was a chair between them. And the two women said, Father Tom, come over, sit with us. I said, okay, I'll be right there. And I sat down and two women looked at me and they said, you know, Father, we're crazy. And it broke my heart. These two women internalized the word crazy as their identifying mark. I looked at them and said, what is your name? And one woman said, Mary, and the other woman said, Elizabeth. Let's go around the room and have everybody say their name as if it were a prayer, because it is. They all
Diane.
claimed their names. Go ahead. Yes, Diane.
Diane.
They claim their name.
Actually, my full name is Diane Louise Elizabeth.
Yes. And that tells a story, doesn't it?
Yes.
It tells a story about you, to you, and from you. Wow.
Well, the Diane is the name that I was given when I was born. Louise is the name that I was given in baptism, which on my baptism certificate, it's referred to as Ludovica. And then Elizabeth is my confirmation name.
Mm. Yes, it's a very, very precious dimension. Thank you for that. Darcy, is it time for a little break? About
That
10
works.
minutes
Sure,
till about 2:05. Would that be good?
that
Is
works.
10 minutes enough?
Oh, I think so.
Okay,
Works
I'll be
perfectly.
right here if you want to keep talking. Okay, so feel free to take a break and we'll see you at 2:05. Are you going to let the recording keep going? Or you?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
So it's one continuous. So I had heard, and it just, but I like your explanation better. that when we see an unnamed person, because there were a few men that were unnamed too, more women though, for sure, that it allows us, it to be anyone, that we can see ourselves in the story, being the one who was raised, being the one who was healed. And that's always kind of struck me as interesting. But I kind of agree with Sharon. A name is such a power. To be called by name is such a beautiful thing. Yeah.
Well, as you know, there's multiple ways to interpret,
Mhm.
and there's multiple motivations for the interpretation. In this particular series, we're not immediately concerned with the biblical interpretation as it pertains to the Gospel of Mark as such, but as it pertains to the dignity of women
Right.
through the filter of what John Paul said, their names have often been eradicated from history.
Yeah.
So we can identify the text different ways. If we want radical inclusion in order to put ourselves in, then that's the technique,
Mhm.
that the nameless people in the scripture are stories about ourselves. But there's another level of interpretation that he goes to those who are nameless, who are deemed by the society as worthless.
Absolutely.
And I see that, you know, when I do weddings and wedding preparations, for example, I confront this deeply. I say, you know, I'm very uncomfortable doing weddings where brides come down the aisle. So if you want that, you'll have to go get another presider, because it's not going to be me. I'm not going to have a groom come out of a closet and a bride come down the aisle and everything's fixated on the bride. I didn't know the bride was a sack of potatoes that was being given to the groom. Well, Father, that's traditional. It isn't traditional in the church. There's nothing in the books that even deflect that kind of a ceremony. Let the groom come down the aisle with his parents or his friends, and then the bride come down the aisle with her parents and her friends, and include the mothers. Why the mother in the pew? So the father's coming down the aisle, the mother's in the pew. This is all sexism. Now you can call it tradition, you can say that, but it's sexism. You can have it, but you can't have me. This stuff's got to stop. The father is not giving the bride away. The bride is a full-fledged human being who can make her own decisions. And Daddy, is it okay with you if I married the man I love? What? So let's stop it.
A
Let's
comment
start.
there I'd make is having attended a wedding in Mexico, in a church there. And what we notice is that the parents walk the bride down, and the parents both walk the groom down together.
Right. And isn't that beautiful? And it's not two families getting married. It's not becoming one great, it's a new family being born. And a man and a woman, they're two adults. They're not being hostile to where they came from, but they're recreating where they came from in their own unique way. And it's so subtle how we do this. It's so subtle how we continue the oppression of women and the stereotyping of men. So if men ever behave differently than the stereotype, there must be something wrong with the man.
I felt that way about the tradition in some families where the groom or the soon-to-be groom asks the permission of the parents to propose. And that never happened in my own marriage. But I've always thought, no, that's kind of odd when one thinks about it, because shouldn't it be up to the woman to decide if she wants to be married and not the permission of her father to say yes?
And would it not be okay for the woman to ask the man if he would like to get married?
Absolutely. There you go. Yeah.
And then they can take the mother and daddy out to dinner
And announce it.
and say, guess what, mom and dad, we're getting married.
Exactly. Yeah, it's funny, all those vestiges of
Yeah,
women as seen as property, and yeah, there's quite a bit of it, and it is tradition, but it's something to look at and say, what are we saying when we do this? Yeah.
But that's where it gets tested when we start looking at the tradition. Can we look at that? Are we allowed to change that?
Very good.
I'd like to go back to the naming issue. My name is Suzanne, and throughout my childhood, until I was in young adulthood and maybe even middle adulthood, probably till I was about 50, people couldn't understand why I didn't like being called Susan.
It's not your name.
It's not my name. I was not seen. You know, and then as fate would have it, I went to work in France, where Suzanne is the form of Susan.
Mm.
And my coworkers thought I had Frenchified my name to work in France. So they also called me Susan. It's like, okay, so probably within the last, I'd say 15 years, I've become Suzanne. And I'm seen as Suzanne now, which is lovely for me, but not for what I do. You know, I can be nameless for what I do, and that's fine. Or I can be whoever you want me to be for what I do.
Sharon brought up a very, very beautiful insight from the book of Revelation, where one of the promises Jesus says, you will have a name that's known between you and God. And so the whole idea, naming in the Bible had nothing to do with possession. It had everything to do with relationship. It was it's just the word of intimacy. Like we could talk about what nicknames we had. There's the nickname. I'll tell you what my nickname was when I was a little kid. Especially my father called me Skipper. I love any form of the word skip. It evokes something. So when you can have your name back, and when other people play with your name, you'll notice the middle initial of my name there's a P there. And so sometimes people call Father Tom Bonacci. I go, wait a minute, whoa, stop. If you're going to do Tom Bonacci, because I don't use the word Bonacci, I use Father Tom. But if you're going to do the Bonacci business, then it has to have the P in it. Because my father was J and I'm P. And it tells the story. One day, somebody said to my father, is that your son? And my dad said, yes. Oh, Tom Jr. And my father, he's not a junior. I was like 6 years old. My father said, I'm Thomas J, he's Thomas P. He's his own person. He's not junior. He's Thomas Peter. And it just struck me like, that's right. I may be my father's son, but I'm my own person, whatever that means. I'm only 6. But it was like, but my name is not a duplicate of somebody else. So to this day, when I get an official document and the P's not there, I send it back and say, I don't know who this is.
You know, I can
She-
relate to your story about the nickname, because I had an aunt, she's long since died, but she used to call me Di, D-I. And I just absolutely didn't like that at all. And, but I never said anything because I was just a child and she was my aunt. And so I just, you know, let it go. And I have a friend now who calls me Di. And I don't have the heart to say to her, please don't call me that. My name is Diane. And so I've just had to learn to try and put that feeling that I have about that name aside, because Di kind of reminds me that, well, someday I'm going to die. Yes, I understand that, but that's not what my name is about. My name is really about love. I think that's what my parents decided. I was the child of love, because isn't Diana supposed to be the goddess of love or whatever the tradition was? But I just, I understand what your feeling is about the nickname.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, welcome back, everyone. Well, as you can see from the notes, there's so much more we could do. So let's see if we can focus to go to some kind of conclusion as to how we're setting up the stage of this particular series. Let me take you to a very wonderful story in the Gospel of Mark. It's on page 5 of the notes, or if you're in the Bible, it's Mark chapter 7, verses 24 to 30. It's an episode that takes place between the feeding of the 5,000 and the feeding of the 4,000 people. What's happening strategically in the Gospel of Mark is the bread for the 5,000, namely the traditional community, is moving to be the bread of the 4,000, the universal community. Remember, especially in the religious tradition of Catholicism, Catholic spirituality by nature compels to the universal. It drives to the universal. If it blesses the tree, it's in love with the forest. If it falls in love with the earth, it's in love with the galaxy. If it blesses the galaxy, it goes to the universe. It's always expansive. It is the nature of it. So the bread for the traditional community, the 5,000, is destined to become the bread for the inclusive community, or the universal community, symbolized in the 4,000. That's the infrastructure of Mark's gospel. But in between those two episodes, the feeding of the 4,000, or the feeding of the 5,000, and the feeding of the 4,000, there's a problematic story, Mark chapter 7, verses 24 to 30. Jesus goes away and wants to be alone in a situation of intimacy with his disciples. As he goes into the retreat center, into the house to retreat, and closes the door, a woman comes in. A woman breaks in. See, there was a woman there. There's always a woman there. The woman breaks into this retreat of the men. He wanted to be alone with them, and this woman comes in. The woman had a little daughter who was sick in bed with a demon, an unclean spirit. When she heard about Jesus, she came to him and fell at his feet. And Mark tells us in verse 26, the woman was a Gentile, a Syro-Phoenician at that, an outsider. Outside the community. She begged Jesus to drive the demon out of her daughter. Jesus said to the woman, it's scandalous what he said, scandalous. He said it isn't right to take the children's food and throw it to dogs. And the word dog here is a derogatory term. He's not calling the woman a dog, he's calling her daughter a dog. Why would I take the bread and throw it to her? She's the dog, which is a derogatory term for an outsider. Why don't those people stay out? A former politician in the United States said, or a former whatever he was, said, we should send troops to the border in the United States and do here what the Russian army is doing in Ukraine. No, kill, baby, kill, power. Is it right to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs? Why would we take freedom, liberty, and justice for all and give it to dogs? Ooh. You would think the woman would get up and say, well, and walk out in a huff. She says to Jesus, you gotta love this. Even the dogs under the table eat the crumbs that fall from the master's plate. This woman has guts. She's the outsider in a house full of 12 people, 13 that are hostile to her. But she's the mom. She'll do anything for her kid. Jesus said to her, for such an answer, go home. Your daughter is well. See, sometimes the circumstances of life tell us to shut up, to get out, to be defeated. Scholars turn themselves into pretzels trying to figure out how to interpret this because they don't like the idea of Jesus being hostile. They don't like the idea of Jesus being derogatory toward the woman. And there's any number of interpretations as to why that is. Well, first of all, it's the way Mark writes the story. Since Mark is the author of the story, he can have the players do anything he wants. But here's my take. If you don't like the way Jesus spoke to the woman, then why do we speak that way about one another? So you can see the woman and Jesus at this point are illustrating graphically what it is to transcend prejudice, hatred, and stereotype. Notice what Jesus said to the woman. Not because of your faith, not because of your philosophy, not because of your belief, but because of what you said. He heard her. Here, Jesus models what it is to be a disciple, to hear another person and change your mind. He heard her. So the miracle is not the result of his miraculous power. As Jesus says, because of what you said. So the voice of women must be heard. The voice of all of us must be heard. But in this particular text, because of what she said, the daughter is made well. Many times in life, you and I are afraid to speak up and stand up because we're afraid we'll be shut up and put down. Not this woman. She stands up, she speaks out, and she saves a life. By now, we're beginning to see the pattern, how Jesus interacts with these women. The women are not the object of his healing, but they are empowered by his respect, so that their uniqueness, their genius can rise. I am suggesting to you that the energy of these women in the New Testament pulsates through the life of the church through all of the centuries, even to this day. Mark chapter 14, verses 3 to 9, page 8. You know the story well. Let me summarize it. Jesus is having dinner and supper in the house of Simon the leper, outside Bethany, close to Jerusalem. His execution is not too far away. A woman comes in to the dinner scene. In Mark's gospel, she's nameless, with an alabaster jar full of precious perfume. She opens up the jar and she pours it on his head, and it seeps down all over his body. If we look at this kind of action in the Hebrew Bible, Jesus has just been anointed king by the woman. She's recognizing Jesus as the shepherd, as the king. There's an immediate reaction. Why this waste of ointment? It could have been sold for 300 denarii and the money given to the poor. Why waste it? And they attacked the woman. Jesus said, leave her alone. She's done a fine and beautiful thing for me. You can serve the poor whenever. Don't use me as an obstacle. She did what she could. She anointed my body for burial ahead of time. Notice that Jesus comes to the defense of the woman who's extravagant with her perfume, courageous with her love, impeccable with her service. Jesus hit the nail on the head. She did what she could. You see, if you're dealing with me, if I can't do everything, I do nothing. But all over the world right now, there are people who are doing what they can. Here's the woman of great courage. She did what she could. Let me conclude before we share. Go to page 9. Here's a traditional crucifixion scene. Notice the women at the foot of the cross are passed out. Traditional interpretation is, well, you know how women are. If you take women to a place of trauma, they'll break down and cry. Wouldn't it be a good idea if some of us could break down and cry when we look at what goes on in the world? Have it break our hearts. Would that be weakness or the strength of what it is to be a human being? Are the women passed out at the foot of the cross because they've been traumatized? Because they're hysterical? Because they're overwhelmed with grief? There's a wonderful Catholic theologian by the name of Marie Sabin. I actually know her. She's a wonderful down-to-earth biblical scholar. She looks at the Bible from a slightly different angle. She says these women are not traumatized. These women are not passed out because of grief They're overwhelmed because they see something. They're having a mystical experience. They're seeing beyond the death. They're seeing what the death signifies. They're seeing what the death means. Traditionally, women have been interpreted as being at the foot of the cross in grief, sorrow, weakness, and needing to be cared for, as opposed to the people who see the meaning of the death in ways that are overwhelming. When we begin our exploration of women through the history of the church, we will see that these are women who have been overcome by the sorrows that afflict people and have come to their aid. Because remember, in the Bible, the very women that are portrayed as passed out at the foot of the cross are the ones who bury him, the one who care for him in death, and the ones who visit him in resurrection. And his traditional disciples are nowhere to be found. So these women model what it is to be a disciple, whether we're man or woman, to be overwhelmed by the sorrows of the world, to have our hearts be touched, and to come to their aid, even if all we can do is the best we can. She did what she could. So here's the mantras that are pulsating through the life of the church. She served them. She touched him. She heard him. She did what she could. In the midst of the conflict, in the midst of the division, God blessed these women who have unendingly blessed us. Any thoughts, any feelings, anything you would like to share before we conclude? Darcy, any concluding announcements or instructions or wisdom?
Well, I don't know about wisdom. I'm leaving that to you today. No, that was just very powerful to me, of raising up these women and looking at them differently. So wow, really appreciate that. In terms of announcements, no, tell your friends they can still join us for the remainder of the series. Just go ahead and have them register so I can send them a link. No, other than that, I'm just so grateful. What a treasure that you can still provide these series for us. It's a good thing. It's a very good thing.
Thank you, everyone. God bless. Be aware, my love and my prayers for all of you. Next week, we'll look at Mary, the mother of Jesus, and spend some significant time with her, because she sets the pattern for the church. Remember, the modern church has called her the first of Christians and the mother of the church. Those are the modern titles for Mary. And I like to explore the two of them. First of Christians, mother of the church. Be well.
Alrighty. Thank you again, everybody. I look forward to seeing you next week.